Salam, peace be upon you, and the mercy and blessings of God. My name is Muhammad Layiq Siddiqui, the father of Holophase. Remember the language we are learning. There is one field, phi, the holophase. One continuous cyclic movement from which all of reality unfolds. When phi begins to change, its first derivatives appear, and with them, the three dimensions show themselves at once. Time as omega, space as kappa, and motion as nu, built from both. Every higher derivative is a finer question about how phi changes, and each one casts three shadows together: a time shadow, a space shadow, and a motion shadow. These echoes mix and weave into one another, forming the patterns we call fields, particles, bodies, thoughts, and worlds. In this picture, everything that exists is a living tapestry of phi, endlessly echoing through its derivatives and their dimensional shadows. Today, we build a library that outlives us all. In this part 51, we undertake the final act of stewardship. We define grammar archives and registries. This is the firewall mechanism that ensures a licensed rule, with all its hard-won context and nuance, is preserved as a complete, reusable object for future generations. The core revelation is about preservation. Civilization must archive grammars as full epistemic objects, not just conclusions. The archive must include the rule statement in canonical form, its scope conditions and applicability gates, its uncertainty and stability radii, the tests it passed and failed, its negative controls, its counterexamples and anomalies, and its full version lineage, what changed and why. We archive not the slogan, but the biography. The skill you gain is that of a knowledge librarian. You will learn what must be documented to make a rule truly doable, so that someone a century from now can pick it up, understand its strengths and limits, and use it safely without repeating the mistakes of its discovery. Our core question is about the longevity of truth. What exactly must be preserved so a law can be reused safely in the future? This question targets the fragility of transmitted knowledge. A rule can pass every test, be written canonically, and be recognized as a deep invariant. But if the only record of it is a terse equation in a textbook, stripped of context, caveats, and validation history, then it becomes a brittle slogan. Future users apply it outside scope. They treat uncertainty as zero. They forget the anomalies that hinted at deeper structure. They are doomed to repeat the errors of the past, or worse, to misuse the rule in ways that cause harm. The archive is the antidote to amnesia. It ensures that the rule's license, its precise terms of validity, travels with the rule forever. This is the ultimate enactment of our core axiom. Rules do not become real by elegance, consensus, or tradition. They earn a license only by surviving falsification, variation, independence, and scope discipline. The archive is the permanent public record of that earning process. It contains the evidence of survival. Building complete archives is necessary because the failure mode it prevents is knowledge decay into dogma. Without archives, rules become black boxes. Their origins are mythologized. Their boundaries are forgotten. They turn from precise, licensed tools into articles of faith. This is how science stagnates. By archiving the full epistemic object, we keep the rule alive as a living, tested, and bounded entity. We allow future generations to audit it, to understand its lineage, and to see precisely where it might need revision or replacement. Now let us anchor this to the holophase triunity, because in holophase, the way you observed something is part of what you claim. Omega is how time was handled, what clocks were used, what sampling rate, what windowing and averaging. Kappa is how space was handled, What spatial resolution, what coordinate frame, what sensor layout, what boundary definitions. New is how motion and dynamics were handled. What reference frames, what action class, what approximations, what coupling assumptions. If we archive a rule without omega, kappa, and nu documentation, we are not archiving a law. We are archiving a shadow with the lamp removed. This connects integrally to energy as tally. The archives must store the accounting logic, not just the final energy balance line, but what was defined as energy, what were the rules of the ledger, under what assumptions does the tally hold, what uncertainty bounds belonged to each term. This prevents future users from seeing a conservation line and mistakenly applying it to an open, dissipative system, then blaming the rule for failing. The archive tells them the precise accounting framework that was licensed. Now we define the archive object itself, an epistemic object record. Say it slowly. Epistemic Object Record. Think of it as a passport for a piece of knowledge. A passport does not only contain your name and photo. It has your birth date, place of birth, expiration date, and stamps, where you've been allowed to go, when you entered, when you exited. The epistemic archive is the passport for a rule. Call it Rule G. It tells you where the rule was born, its discovery context, its date of issue, its license date, its visas, its scope, and its travel history. Tests passed, anomalies encountered, revisions made. So the archive record includes mandatory fields. First, the rule statement in canonical form, the clean, unambiguous G canonical. Second, scope conditions and applicability gates, explicit omega, kappa, nu boundaries. Which timescales, which spatial scales, which dynamical regimes. Third, uncertainty and stability radii. Error bars, sensitivity to windowing, filtering, boundary handling, and other meta choices. Fourth, tests passed and failed. The log of every firewall gate encountered, including negative controls. Fifth, counterexamples and anomalies. Any 5 sentences that conflicted with the rule, even if later explained. Not shame, but frontier. Sixth, version lineage. All revisions linked, with explanations of why each change was made. Now the triunity dictates extra documentation inside the archive. Every archive grammar must include explicit records of how omega was measured or reconstructed, what clocks, what sampling, what time windows, what averaging, how kappa was sampled or structured, spatial resolution, coordinate choices, imaging modality, or sensor network layout, how new regimes were handled, reference frames, how forces or fields were inferred, what dynamical approximations were made, how joint omega kappa nu coherence was validated, the triunity audit that proves the rule survived simultaneous variation in time, space, and motion handling. This ensures that anyone reopening the archive understands the epistemic stance, the observational perspective from which the rule was constructed. Now we formalize the act of archiving in audio-friendly form. We define an archiving function called arch. Arch takes a fully licensed rule G and its complete validation dossier D and produces a signed, time-stamped record R. Say it. Arch of G and D gives R. And record R is a structured container. In plain words, R contains an ID, the canonical form, the scope fields, uncertainty radii, test logs, anomaly lists, and lineage pointers. The registry is where these records live. A registry is public, versioned, and interlinked. It is civilization-scale memory. When the registrar office receives a newly licensed rule, it assembles the epistemic object record, validates completeness, assigns a persistent identifier, and deposits it into the grammar registry. The registry can show relationships between rules, equivalence classes, derivations from more fundamental constraints, and the exact version graph of the field. Now, prediction and falsification apply even to the archive system. Prediction for a complete archive. Future teams can reproduce the rule's claims without inheriting hidden assumptions. They can query the archive, see exactly how omega, kappa, and nu were handled, re-implement the validation tests with modern tools, and arrive at the same license conclusion within uncertainty. The archive enables true context-aware reproduction. Falsification condition. If a future team follows the archive protocol with high fidelity and fails to reproduce the rule's core claims, then one of two things happened. Either the archive was incomplete, a critical hidden assumption was not documented, and the archive is falsified as a complete record. Or the rule was miscertified, the original validation was flawed, and the rule's license is falsified. This creates a feedback loop that improves both archives and the firewall itself. Now, the license consequence ties certification directly to archival completeness. You are allowed to discover and license rules. However, final high-stakes certification is contingent on creation and registration of a complete epistemic object record in the grammar registry. The rule is not fully licensed until it is fully archived. You may not claim a rule is settled foundational knowledge without depositing its full epistemic biography in the public registry. You may not hide anomalies or negative results to make the rule look stronger. You may not use a rule in critical applications without first checking its archived scope and stability radii. Archiving result. A rule without a proper archive cannot be treated as stable knowledge. It remains provisional. Only rules with a complete registered epistemic object record earn the designation archived and stable. Rules lacking this are labeled provisional, unarchived, and their use comes with a warning. Full context not preserved, handle with extreme caution. Now let's make this human again with a living example. Imagine the archive entry for the rule of seasonal migration used by herders in the Central Highlands for centuries. The canonical form might be a set of conditional statements linking grass height, a kappa measure at a specific place, an animal condition, a new state of fatigue and movement, to a decision to move, an omega-timed action. The archive would include scope, valid for certain breeds, in regions between certain elevations, under precipitation patterns within historical variability. Tests passed. Centuries of observed success in avoiding winter starvation. Anomalies. Recorded years when the rule failed. Early snow, drought, unusual wind patterns, mapping the limits. Omega documentation. How timing was decided. Plant flowering, temperature drops, wind shifts. Kappa documentation. How pasture boundaries were assessed. Known grazing lines, water points, past conditions. New documentation. How herd fatigue was read. Speed, gait, lagging behavior. Lineage. Links to newer satellite-based pasture monitoring rules that superseded it in some areas. This archive transforms folk wisdom from a vulnerable oral tradition into a resilient, analyzable epistemic object. A future planner can study it, understand its logic and failure modes, and integrate its insight into modern systems without romanticizing it or abusing it. That is what archives do. They preserve truth with boundaries. The skill you gain as a knowledge librarian is the discipline of documenting for eternity. You learn that publishing a paper is not the end. You must ask, have I captured the full context? Have I been honest about the warts? Is the triunity clear? Is the accounting open? This turns research from a private achievement into a public good. Let us reiterate the core axiom. Rules do not become real by elegance, consensus, or tradition. They earn a license only by surviving falsification, variation, independence, and scope discipline. The archive is the certified public record of that earned license. It is the proof of survival. And the companion axiom: when a rule fails, we do not believe harder. We tighten, downgrade, or retire its license. When an archive is found incomplete, we do not defend pride. We downgrade the archive certification, tighten archival standards, and update the record with what was missing. So we have defined grammar archives and registries, the firewall mechanism for long-term persistence and safe reuse of licensed knowledge. It mandates complete epistemic object records that include canonical form, scope, validation history, anomalies, and lineage, with explicit triunity documentation. The firewall acts as archive registrar, maintaining a permanent public registry. The prediction is faithful reproducibility. The falsification condition is reproduction failure, revealing either incomplete archive or flawed certification. The license consequence is stability. Only properly archived rules become stable foundations. With this, we have built a memory-keeping layer of truth. Yet, even with a perfect archive, a final step remains. For a rule to be used wisely in daily civilization, by engineers, doctors, judges, teachers, the long archive entry is too much. They need a clear, immediate label that states in plain language what is this rule allowed to claim and what is it strictly forbidden from claiming. Archiving preserves memory. Civilization needs labels that state what a law is allowed to claim. Salam and peace be upon you. Before we close, let me give you one more image, because archives can sound like paperwork until you feel the safety they create. Imagine an airport. Thousands of people pass through every day. If the airport relied only on oral tradition, we usually check bags, we normally scan passports, the system would collapse the moment new staff arrived or a new threat appeared. So airports use checklists, logs, stamps, and registries. A passport stamp is not decoration. It is a verified record that a border was crossed under specific conditions. A log is not an insult to the staff. It is how the institution remembers what it did and why. A grammar archive is the same kind of infrastructure, but for truth. It is not saying we don't trust scientists. It is saying we don't trust time. Time erodes memory, language, and institutions. The archive is how we make truth travel through time without turning into legend. Now think about how knowledge is used in daily life. A bridge engineer does not build from a slogan. The engineer asks, what is the material, the load range, the temperature range, the safety factor, the fatigue history, the failure modes? In other words, scope, uncertainty, and history. If the only thing the engineer has is a classroom sentence, stress equals force over area, with no caveats about cracks, corrosion, cyclic loading, and error bars, people can die. The archive protects civilization from these quiet tragedies. Medicine teaches the same lesson. A doctor does not prescribe a drug because it works. The doctor checks dosage, contraindications, studied populations, and side effects. That is an archive, a registry of evidence, boundaries, and risk. If medicine were taught by slogans alone, catastrophe would be normal. So when we say archive grammars as full epistemic objects, we mean store rules in the form that real users need, not the form that fits on a board. A registry must also be searchable. Otherwise, it becomes a graveyard. The grammar registry is indexed, so a future team can ask, show me rules licensed in this omega range. Show me rules valid at this kappa resolution. Show me rules stress-tested in this new regime. Show me anomalies. Show me which newer rule superseded this one and why. Knowledge is not a pile of stones. It is a connected city. A registry is the map. And one subtle power. Archives store failed roads. They record what did not work, models that failed, measurement methods that biased results, filters that created artifacts. That prevents reinvention and keeps the community honest. Finally, archives must produce clear labels. Even with a perfect biography, daily life cannot read 100 pages before acting. So every archived rule must also have a short license label that says, in plain spoken language, this rule is allowed to claim this. It is forbidden from claiming that. It is safe in these conditions. It is dangerous in those conditions. Archiving preserves memory. Labeling preserves wisdom in action. That is why this part is the final act of stewardship. We do not only discover truth, we protect it, package it, and deliver it in forms that do not decay into dogma. One more piece makes the registry truly civilizational: permanence. A rule's identifier must be persistent, like a lighthouse number. Even if universities close, even if websites disappear, the identifier must still point to a recoverable record. That is why the registry is versioned and timestamped. When a rule is updated, the old version does not vanish. It remains accessible with a clear note, superseded by version 2. And the reason is stated: new data, tighter uncertainty analysis, a discovered artifact, a broader scope test. This prevents a quiet kind of corruption, rewriting the past to look smarter. Instead, the registry shows the honest path of growth. It also protects credit. It records who contributed, what evidence was added, and when. That is important not for ego, but because accountability is part of trust. If a rule later harms someone because it was used outside scope, the registry allows investigators to see whether the scope was clear, whether warnings were present, and whether misuse occurred. So an archive is not only memory, it is responsibility, publicly recorded. And notice the deeper beauty. Archives keep science humble. They remind us that every law is a tool with a domain, not a throne with absolute authority. They let students see that progress is not magic. It is careful testing, careful labeling, and careful repair. When the community treats archives as sacred, it does not mean it worships old laws. It means it worships the discipline of honesty that makes revision possible without chaos. That is how a living civilization keeps truth sharp, gentle, and safely shareable forever. Salam, and always peace be upon you.